The stone steps blurred beneath Nina Orwell's vision as her knees buckled, the silver tea tray clattering from her trembling fingers and cascading down the grand staircase of Castle Thorne, like a metallic waterfall announcing her failure to 300 immortal souls below. She didn't even feel herself hit the marble. One moment she was climbing toward the third-floor guest chambers with her 23rd delivery of the evening, and the next the world tilted sideways, her body folding like paper as exhaustion finally claimed what 3 consecutive sleepless nights had stolen from her. The last thing Nina registered before darkness swallowed her whole was the strange beauty of the chandelier above spinning, its crystals catching moonlight and throwing rainbows across her fading consciousness. She never heard the footsteps that thundered up the stairs seconds later, never felt the impossibly strong arms that caught her before her head could crack against the unforgiving stone, never saw the winter-pale face that loomed over hers, white hair falling forward like fresh snow, crimson eyes blazing with something between fury and concern. Lord Aurelius Drăculești, High King of the Northern Vampire Courts, had lived for 8 centuries without ever feeling his heart stop. But as he scooped the fragile human woman into his arms, her skin burning with fever and exhaustion, something in his ancient chest constricted with an unfamiliar panic. "Cassian," his voice cracked like thunder through the castle halls. "Fetch the physician now." The king's personal guard materialized from the shadows, his own white hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, amber eyes widening at the scene. "My lord, she is dying," Aurelius snarled, fangs extending involuntarily. "Move!" He didn't wait for a response. With the unconscious woman cradled against his chest as though she weighed nothing at all, the Vampire King ascended the remaining flights to the private royal wing, where no servant had stepped foot in over a century. His own chambers, his sanctuary. The one place in this massive fortress where he could be alone with his thoughts and his books, and his carefully maintained distance from the mortals who served his court. The doors swung open at his approach, responding to his will. He laid Nina carefully on his bed, the black silk sheets dark against her simple gray uniform. Up close he could see the purple shadows under her eyes, the hollow of her cheeks, the way her lips had gone nearly colorless. Her brown hair had escaped its practical bun, spreading across his pillow in waves that somehow made her look even more vulnerable. His fingers hovered over her forehead, feeling the heat radiating from her skin without even touching. Fever, exhaustion, possibly malnutrition. How long had she been pushing herself like this? How had he not noticed? "Because you don't notice the servants," a voice whispered in his mind. "Because you've spent 300 years deliberately not noticing them, so you don't have to feel responsible for their fragile mortal lives." The physician arrived within minutes, a vampire woman named Isadora with silver white hair twisted into an elaborate crown of braids. She carried a leather bag and moved with the efficiency of someone who had practiced medicine for multiple human lifetimes. "My lord," she said, bowing briefly before turning her attention to Nina. "What happened?" "She collapsed on the stairs. She's burning up." Aurelius stepped back but found he couldn't move far. His feet seemed rooted 3 paces from his own bed, watching as Isadora conducted her examination. The physician checked Nina's pulse, lifted her eyelids, pressed skilled fingers to her throat and wrists. After several long minutes she turned to face the king with an expression of carefully controlled disapproval. Severe exhaustion, dehydration and fever brought on by her weakened state. "When did this human last sleep properly, my lord? When did she last eat a full meal?" "I don't." Aurelius stopped himself, jaw clenching. "I don't know." "I see." Isadora's tone remained professionally neutral, but he heard the judgment beneath it. "With your permission, I'll start her on fluids and nutrients." "She needs rest, my lord. Days of it, possibly a week. Her body has been running on nothing but will and desperation." Something hot and uncomfortable twisted in Aurelius's chest. Guilt. He was feeling guilt. How novel. Do whatever she needs. He moved to the window, staring out at the sprawling grounds of his estate. Castle Thorne sat on the outskirts of New London, hidden from human eyes by ancient magic and modern technology working in concert. To the mortal world, this was simply a historic landmark closed for renovations. To vampire society, it was the seat of power for the entire northern hemisphere. Hundreds of vampires called this place home, and they required hundreds of human servants to maintain the careful balance between the old ways and modern secrecy. Servants he apparently worked to death without noticing. "She'll need supervision," Isadora said, preparing an IV with practiced ease. "Someone should watch her through the night, make sure the fever breaks properly." "I'll do it." The physician's hands stilled. "My lord," I said, "I'll do it." Aurelius turned from the window, his crimson eyes meeting her startled amber ones. "This happened under my roof, in my castle. I'll take responsibility. Isadora opened her mouth, closed it, then simply nodded. She was old enough and wise enough not to question the Vampire King when he used that tone. As you wish. I'll leave medications and instructions. Call for me if her condition changes. After Isadora departed, Aurelius found himself alone with the unconscious woman in his bed. He pulled a chair close, settling into it with the infinite patience of immortality. Strange how the room felt different with her in it, less like a tomb and more like a space where living things might exist. He studied her properly now, without the panic of those first moments. She was young, probably mid-20s, with delicate features that suggested both strength and softness. Her hands, resting limply on the sheets, bore the calluses and small scars of hard labor. He found himself wondering about those hands. What they'd touched, what they'd created, what dreams they'd held before ending up in service to beings like him. Hours passed in silence. Aurelius read through several of his books, occasionally glancing up to check on her breathing, the rise and fall of her chest. Around midnight she began to stir, small sounds of distress escaping her lips. The fever was making her restless. He set his book aside and moved to the bedside, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. She quieted at the touch, leaning into it unconsciously. Something about that simple gesture of trust made his centuries-old heart ache. Rest, he murmured, though she couldn't hear him. You're safe now. Nina woke to softness. After 3 years of sleeping on a thin mattress in the servants' quarters, the sensation of actual comfort was so foreign that for several confused moments she thought she might have died. Perhaps she'd fallen down those stairs and broken her neck, and this was whatever came after. Then pain registered. The dull throb behind her eyes, the ache in every muscle, the scratchy feeling in her throat. Dead people probably didn't feel this awful. She forced her eyes open and immediately regretted it. The room was dark except for soft firelight, but even that felt too bright. As her vision adjusted, she realized she was staring at a ceiling painted with elaborate frescoes. Angels and demons locked in eternal battle, rendered in such detail she could make out individual feathers and scales. This was definitely not the servants' quarters. You're awake. Nina's head snapped toward the voice, which turned out to be a terrible idea as the room spun violently. When everything settled, she found herself staring at the most beautiful and terrifying man she'd ever seen. He sat in an ornate chair beside the bed, dressed entirely in black except for the white of his shirt collar. His hair was long and pale as moonlight, pulled back loosely so it fell past his shoulders. His skin matched his hair in pallor, as though he'd never seen the sun in his entire life. But it was his eyes that froze her in place. Deep crimson, like rubies or fresh blood, fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. She knew who he was. Every servant in Castle Thorne knew Lord Aurelius by sight, even if most of them never got close enough to truly see him. The Vampire King, the master of this domain. The immortal being who could end her life with less effort than it took her to blink. My lord. Nina tried to sit up, panic flooding through her exhausted body. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to. Where am I? What happened? Stop. One word spoken softly but with absolute authority. She froze. You collapsed on the stairs. You've been unconscious for nearly 20 hours. 20 hours. Horror washed through her. The evening service, the guest chambers, Lady Morgana's blood wine needs to be warmed to precisely all taken care of. He leaned forward, those unsettling red eyes narrowing. Do you know why you collapsed, Nina Orwell? The fact that he knew her name shocked her almost as much as finding herself in what was clearly his private chambers. I must have stumbled. I'm very sorry, my lord. If I've caused any disruption, you've been working triple shifts for 3 weeks straight. It wasn't a question. Taking on duties for servants who left or died. Sleeping an average of 2 hours per night. Skipping meals so the newer staff could eat their full portions. Nina's mouth went dry. How did he know all of that? She'd been so careful to hide it, to make sure no one realized how stretched thin the servant staff had become after the last recruitment drive failed. Someone had to do it, she whispered. We're short-staffed and the winter court season just started. All those visiting nobles and their entourages, they expect perfect service. I couldn't let the castle's reputation suffer because, so you decided to kill yourself instead? The blunt words hit her like a slap. I wasn't. You were dying. Aurelius rose from his chair and Nina realized exactly how tall he was. Easily over 6 feet, with a presence that filled the room like a physical force. Isadora confirmed it. Another day or two of this pace and your body would have simply shut down. Is that what you wanted? No. Nina struggled to sit up fully, though her arms shook with the effort. I just wanted to do my job. I wanted to be useful. I wanted. Her voice cracked. I have nowhere else to go, my lord. This position is everything to me. I can't fail at it. Something shifted in his expression. The anger didn't disappear, but it softened around the edges into something almost like understanding. "You're in my personal chambers," he said quietly, sitting on the edge of the bed. The mattress didn't even dip under his weight. "Do you know why?" Nina shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Because when I saw you fall, when I caught you and felt how fragile you'd become, I realized something I've been avoiding for 3 centuries. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers were cool against her feverish skin. "I realized that I'd forgotten how to see the people who keep my world running. You'd become invisible to me, all of you. And that invisibility nearly killed you." Tears pricked at Nina's eyes. She didn't know what to say. This was the Vampire King, an immortal being who'd ruled his kind for longer than her country had existed, and he was apologizing to her? "I'm issuing a decree," Aurelius continued, his hand dropping away. "Effective immediately. You are forbidden from working." Nina's heart stopped. "What? No, please, you can't." "For 2 weeks, he clarified, his lips quirking slightly. "Doctor's orders. You'll stay here in the royal wing where I can ensure you actually rest. You'll eat 3 proper meals a day. You'll sleep in a real bed. And you will not lift a single finger in service until Isadora clears you as healthy. But the other servants, I'm hiring more staff. I'm also reviewing working conditions across the entire castle." This should never have happened. His expression hardened again. "And it will never happen again. That's not a request, Miss Orwell. That's a command from your king." Nina stared at him, torn between relief and confusion and something else she couldn't name. "Why do you care?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "I'm nobody. Just another human servant." Aurelius was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those ancient knowing eyes. "I'm still trying to figure that out myself," he admitted. "But I do care. Against all logic and 300 years of careful detachment, I find that I care very much whether you live or die. So you're going to stay here and rest and let yourself heal. Do we have an understanding?" What could she say to that? What could any mortal say when the Vampire King himself decided to take an interest? "Yes, my lord. Aurelius," he corrected softly. "When we're alone, you may call me Aurelius." The next 2 weeks transformed Nina's entire understanding of the world. She'd expected to be isolated in some corner guest room, perhaps visited once daily by a physician to check on her recovery. Instead, she found herself installed in a suite of rooms connected to Aurelius's own chambers, living in luxury she'd only glimpsed while cleaning. The king visited her constantly. He brought her breakfast himself the first morning, carrying a tray laden with foods she'd only dreamed about. Fresh fruit, pastries, eggs prepared perfectly, coffee that actually tasted expensive. She'd tried to protest that he shouldn't be serving her, but the look he gave her could have frozen the sun. "You'll eat," he'd said simply. "All of it, or I'll stand here all day until you do." She ate. He brought books from his personal library. When he discovered she loved reading but rarely had time for it, he seemed to take it as a personal mission to find every volume she might enjoy. Fantasy novels sat stacked beside historical accounts, poetry collections next to modern thrillers. They spent hours discussing stories, debating character motivations, arguing about endings. Nina found herself forgetting to be afraid of him during those conversations. He was too passionate about literature, too genuinely interested in her opinions. "That's absurd," she argued on the 4th day, gesturing animatedly at the book in her lap. The heroine didn't need rescuing. She was perfectly capable of saving herself if the author had just given her agency. Aurelius leaned back in his chair, a genuine smile playing at his lips. It transformed his severe features into something breathtaking. "You think all rescue is inherently demeaning." "I think assuming someone needs rescue without asking is demeaning," Nina corrected. "There's a difference between offering help and imposing it." His smile faded slightly. "Is that what you think I'm doing? Imposing?" Nina paused, considering. Was it? He'd forbidden her from working, installed her in his chambers, taken over her entire life without her permission. By her own definition, that should feel like an imposition. But somehow it didn't. "I think you're trying to help," she said carefully. "In the only way you know how, by taking control. I've been king for a very long time," Aurelius admitted. "Giving orders is easier than asking questions. But you're right, I should have asked." He met her eyes directly. "Nina Orwell, would you like my help recovering from the exhaustion that nearly killed you?" She couldn't help but smile. "Yes, Aurelius, I would." Something warm flickered in those red eyes. He liked hearing his name from her lips, she realized. The thought sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. As the days passed, Nina learned things about the Vampire King that no servant gossip had ever hinted at. He was brilliant but often lonely. He'd read every book in his vast library, some multiple times. He played chess against himself because few opponents challenged him anymore. He painted, though he claimed he wasn't very good. When she asked to see his work, he'd reluctantly shown her canvases covered in stunning landscapes and portraits, all rendered in the precise detail of someone who'd had centuries to perfect the craft. "They're beautiful," she breathed, studying a painting of a forest at twilight. "How can you say you're not good?" "I can copy what I see," Aurelius said, standing beside her. "But I struggle to create what I feel. Art should have soul, not just skill." Nina turned to look at him. They were standing close enough that she could feel the coolness radiating from his body, could smell something like old books and winter frost. "Maybe you're looking at it wrong. Maybe perfection is what's getting in your way. Soul comes from imperfection, from vulnerability." He stared at her for a long moment. "When did you become so wise?" "Probably around the same time I learned that vampire kings could be kind." The air between them shifted, charging with something electric and dangerous. Aurelius reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek with infinite gentleness. "You're making this very difficult," he murmured. "Making what difficult?" "Maintaining proper distance. You're human, Nina, fragile and mortal and entirely inappropriate for someone like me to." He stopped himself, pulling back. "You should rest. Isidore will be by this evening to check on you." He left before she could ask what he'd meant to say. But Nina lay awake that night, her recovering body humming with an energy that had nothing to do with fever. She was falling for him. For an 800-year-old vampire who could kill her with a thought. For the king who'd carried her to his own bed and forbidden her from destroying herself. For the lonely artist who read poetry by firelight and argued about fictional characters with surprising passion. She was falling, and she had no idea if he'd catch her. By the end of the first week, Nina felt physically better than she had in months. The constant exhaustion had lifted, the fog in her mind had cleared, and she'd actually gained back some of the weight she'd lost. But emotionally, she was more confused than ever. Aurelius had become the center of her world during this forced recovery. He spent hours with her every day, talking, reading, simply existing in comfortable silence. She'd learned the subtle tells of his moods, the way his jaw tightened when he was frustrated, how his eyes would soften when she made him laugh, the particular tilt of his head when he was genuinely curious about something she said. And she'd caught him looking at her with an expression that made her breath catch. Hunger, but not the kind that involved fangs. Longing that seemed to span centuries. They were playing chess on the 8th evening when everything changed. Nina had gotten better at the game under his patient instruction, though she still lost more often than not. This time, however, she'd managed to corner his king in a way he clearly hadn't anticipated. "Checkmate," she said, hardly believing it herself. Aurelius stared at the board, then slowly smiled. "Well played. You've been practicing strategy. I had a good teacher." Nina stood to stretch, wandering toward the window. Night had fallen hours ago, and the grounds were beautiful under moonlight. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why haven't you fed since I've been here?" She heard him go completely still behind her. "What makes you think I haven't? You're paler than usual. Your movements are slightly slower, though you probably think I don't notice. And Isadora mentioned something to Cassian about you being stubborn." Nina turned to face him. "You're starving yourself. Why?" Aurelius stood, moving toward her with that predatory grace that reminded her exactly what he was. "Because you're here, in my space. Your scent is everywhere. Your blood is." He stopped himself, jaw clenching. "I don't trust myself to feed properly while you're still recovering. While you're vulnerable, you think you'd hurt me? I think you make me feel things I haven't felt in centuries, and that lack of control is dangerous." He stopped a few feet away, hands clenched at his sides. "I think you've gotten under my skin in a way I didn't believe was possible anymore. And I think if I let myself get close to you while my control is weakened by hunger, I might do something we'd both regret." Nina's heart pounded. What if I wouldn't regret it? His eyes flashed crimson. Don't what? Don't feel something for you? Too late. She took a step closer. "Don't acknowledge that there's something between us? We both know there is." "You're human," Aurelius said, roughly. "I'm a monster who's lived longer than your grandparents' grandparents. Whatever this is, it can't happen." "Why not?" "Because I could kill you." The words exploded from him. "Because one moment of lost control, 1 second of giving in to what I want, and you'd be dead. Because you'd deserve a life with someone who can give you sunlight and warmth and a future that doesn't involve watching you age and die while I stay exactly like this." He gestured sharply at himself. "I've cared for humans before, Nina. I've watched every single one of them crumble to dust. I can't do it again. I won't." Nina absorbed this, understanding finally clicking into place. He wasn't pushing her away because he didn't care. He was pushing her away because he cared too much. "What if I'm willing to take that risk?" she asked quietly. "Well, I'm not." Aurelius turned away, shoulders rigid. In a few days, Isadora will clear you for work. You'll return to your duties. We'll forget this happened, will we? Nina moved closer, placing herself between him and the door. Can you actually forget? Because I don't think I can. I don't think I want to, Nina. I spent 3 years invisible, she interrupted, working myself to death because I thought that was all I was worth. Then you saw me. You actually saw me. Do you know how rare that is? How precious? She reached out, her small, warm hand landing on his chest. His heart didn't beat beneath her palm, but she felt him inhale sharply. I'm not asking for forever, Aurelius. I'm not asking you to turn me or make promises about eternity. I'm just asking for now. For this. For whatever time we have. I could destroy you, he whispered, his hand coming up to cover hers. You could, she agreed. But you won't. You've spent 800 years learning control. You've proven every single day I've been here that you'd never hurt me. I trust you. You shouldn't, but I do. They stood frozen for a heartbeat. Then Aurelius made a sound between a growl and a groan, and his control finally shattered. He pulled her against him, one hand tangling in her hair while the other wrapped around her waist. His lips found hers with desperate intensity, kissing her like a man dying of thirst who'd finally found water. Nina melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck. He was cool where she was warm, hard where she was soft, and the contrast was intoxicating. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. This is a terrible idea, Aurelius said, but he didn't let her go. Probably, Nina agreed, smiling against his lips. Want to stop? No. He kissed her again, softer this time. God help me, no. They stood there in the firelight, holding each other as though letting go would mean the end of the world. Outside, the castle continued its ancient rhythms. Inside, something entirely new had begun. The next morning, Nina woke to find Aurelius sitting in his usual chair, watching her sleep. For a moment she worried he'd regret everything. Then she saw the soft expression on his face, the gentle smile playing at his lips. Good morning, she said, sitting up. Good morning. He stood, moving to sit on the edge of the bed. We need to talk. Her heart sank. Here it came. The speech about why last night was a mistake. If we're going to do this, Aurelius continued, we do it properly. I'm done hiding. I'm done pretending I don't care. He took her hand, his cool fingers intertwining with her warm ones. I want to court you, Nina Orwell, publicly. Let the entire court know that you're under my personal protection, that you're important to me. Nina blinked. You what? Unless you'd prefer to keep it secret. I'd understand if you're not ready for no, she squeezed his hand. No, I thought you were going to say last night was a mistake. Last night was the first thing I've done right in decades. Aurelius raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. But it does complicate things. The court will talk. There will be vampires who consider it inappropriate for me to be involved with a human. There may even be some who see you as a threat or a weakness to exploit. That's comforting, Nina said dryly. I won't let anyone hurt you, he said fiercely. That's not a maybe, Nina. That's absolute. You're mine now, and I protect what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice should probably have bothered her. Instead, it sent warmth flooding through her chest. Yours? If you'll have me. For the first time since she'd known him, Aurelius looked uncertain, vulnerable. I know I'm not an easy choice. I know I come with complications and dangers and a rather excessive amount of baggage. But I'm asking anyway. Will you be mine? Will you let me be yours? Nina cupped his face in her hands, feeling the cool smoothness of his skin. Yes, she whispered. To all of it. Yes. His smile could have lit up the night sky. He kissed her slowly, thoroughly, pouring centuries of loneliness and longing into it. When they finally broke apart, Nina was dizzy. I should probably feed, Aurelius murmured against her lips. Before I lose control and do something stupid. Would it help if I offered? He went completely still. Nina, I mean it. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. If we're doing this, if I'm yours, then shouldn't I understand all of what that means? I want to know you, Aurelius, all of you, including the parts that need blood to survive. It's not just sustenance, he said carefully. When vampires feed from someone they care about, there's an intimacy to it. A connection. It's not something to offer lightly. I'm not offering lightly. Nina tilted her head, exposing her throat. I trust you. Aurelius looked at her neck like a starving man looking at a feast. His eyes had gone completely crimson, fangs extending slightly. She saw him fighting with himself, desire warring with control. Are you absolutely certain? His voice had gone rough, inhuman, yes. He moved slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind. His lips brushed her throat, finding the pulse point. This will hurt for just a moment, then it'll feel. He trailed off. Feel what? Good, too good maybe. His arms wrapped around her, holding her secure. Tell me if you want me to stop. Then his fangs pierced her skin. Nina gasped at the initial pain, sharp and bright. But Aurelius was right. Within seconds, the pain transformed into something else entirely. Warmth flooded through her, pleasure unlike anything she'd ever experienced. She felt connected to him in a way that went beyond physical, as though their souls were touching. She could sense his emotions, his overwhelming relief at finally feeding, his fierce protectiveness toward her, his deep, undeniable love. He loved her. The thought made her dizzy. Aurelius pulled back after what felt like both seconds and hours, his tongue sealing the wounds on her neck. Nina swayed and he caught her easily, laying her back on the bed. "How do you feel?" he asked, his thumb stroking her cheek. "Like I'm floating. Is that normal?" "It's the venom. It'll pass in a few minutes." He lay beside her, gathering her close. "Thank you, that was." He seemed at a loss for words. "Thank you." Nina curled into him, feeling safe and cherished and more alive than she'd ever been. "So this is what you were worried about? That was amazing." He chuckled, the sound vibrating through his chest. "Dangerous woman. Now I'll want to do it again. Would that be so bad? I'm supposed to be taking care of you, not turning you into my personal blood source. What if I want to be both?" Aurelius groaned. "You're going to be the death of me, or the unlife of me. Whatever applies." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other. Outside, Nina heard the castle coming to life for the evening. Vampires rising, servants preparing for the night's activities. A world that would soon know about them. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now we figure it out together," Aurelius said, "one night at a time." The formal announcement came 3 days later. Isadora had cleared Nina for light duties, though Aurelius had immediately overruled that and insisted she remain on recovery leave for another week. Nina suspected he just wanted to keep her close, which she found absurdly endearing. The evening court session was held in the grand throne room, a massive hall of black marble and silver that could hold hundreds of vampires comfortably. Nina had cleaned this room countless times but never attended an actual session. Servants weren't invited unless they were serving, and she'd always been too busy for that privilege anyway. Tonight, she entered on the Vampire King's arm. The throne room fell silent as they appeared. Hundreds of pale faces turned toward them, crimson and amber and silver eyes widening in shock. Nina fought the urge to hide behind Aurelius. Instead, she kept her spine straight and her chin up, channeling every bit of courage she possessed. Aurelius looked magnificent in formal court attire. Black coat with silver embroidery, white shirt, dark trousers tucked into high boots. His white hair had been pulled back partially, the rest flowing down his back. He looked every inch the ancient, powerful king he was, and he was holding her hand like she mattered. They ascended the dais together. Aurelius guided her to a chair that had been placed beside his throne. Not a throne itself, but close enough to make a statement. Nina sat carefully, aware of every eye on her. "Thank you all for attending," Aurelius said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the chamber. "I have an announcement regarding changes to castle protocol." The vampires waited in tense silence. "Effective immediately, I'm restructuring how we treat our human staff. Working conditions will be reviewed and improved. No servant will work more than their contracted hours. Accommodations and meals will meet standards befitting those who serve this court." He paused. "These changes come from recent realizations about how we've failed in our responsibilities as employers and protectors." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Nina spotted surprise on many faces, approval on some, skepticism on others. Additionally, Aurelius continued, his hand finding Nina's. "I'm formally announcing my courtship of Nina Orwell. She is under my personal protection. Any disrespect shown to her will be considered disrespect to me directly. Any threat to her will be met with my full wrath. Is that understood?" The silence was deafening. Then Cassian, standing at the foot of the dais, bowed deeply. "Congratulations, my lord, my lady." Others followed his lead, bowing and offering congratulations. Not everyone looked happy about it, but no one dared protest openly. Not when their king looked ready to tear apart anyone who tried. A vampire woman with silver hair and calculating amber eyes stepped forward. "My lord, forgive my boldness, but the court has questions. A human consort is highly unusual. What are your intentions regarding succession? Regarding the future of the Northern Court?" "My intentions," Aurelius said coldly, "are to be happy for the first time in 300 years. If that's unusual, so be it. As for succession, I've been king for 8 centuries without an heir. I think we can manage a bit longer." The woman bowed, but Nina saw the displeasure in her eyes. She'd made an enemy there, probably one of many to come. The rest of the court session passed in a blur of formal business and politics. Nina tried to follow along, but the vampire world was complex and steeped in traditions she didn't understand. Aurelius kept her hand in his throughout, occasionally squeezing gently when he sensed her anxiety. Afterward, as they walked back to his chambers through the castle corridors, Nina finally let out the breath she'd been holding. That was terrifying, she admitted. You did wonderfully. Aurelius pulled her into an alcove away from passing vampires. You held your head high and refused to be intimidated. I was proud. That woman with the amber eyes. She's going to be a problem, isn't she? Lady Seraphine has been a problem for 2 centuries. Don't worry about her. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Though you're right that there will be resistance. Some vampires still cling to old prejudices about humans. They'll need time to adjust, and if they don't adjust, his eyes flashed. Then they'll learn why I've remained king for 800 years. I didn't survive this long by letting others dictate my choices. Nina rose on her toes to kiss him. My fierce vampire king. Your vampire king, he corrected against her lips. I quite like the sound of that. They spent the evening in his art studio, a room Nina hadn't seen before. It was filled with paintings in various stages of completion, easels and brushes and the smell of oils. Aurelius set up a fresh canvas and handed her a palette. I can't paint, Nina protested. Neither can I, according to my own standards. Paint anyway. Show me vulnerability and imperfection and soul. They painted side by side, laughing when colors mixed wrong, commenting on each other's attempts. Nina's canvas ended up covered in abstract swirls that might have been emotions given form. Aurelius's showed a woman with brown hair bathed in firelight rendered in his precise but somehow softer style. Is that supposed to be me? Nina asked. It's how I see you. Beautiful, strong, glowing with life. He set down his brush. Thank you. For what? For teaching me how to see again. How to feel. He pulled her close, paint-stained hands and all. For being brave enough to fall in love with a monster. You're not a monster, Nina said firmly. You're just a man who's lived a very long time and forgotten how to be happy. But you're remembering. I can see it, because of you. Because you let me in. They kissed among the paintings and brushes, 2 souls finding each other across an impossible divide. Outside, the night deepened. Inside, a vampire king and a human maid fell deeper in love. The threats started a week later. Nina found the first notes slipped under her door in the servants' quarters. She'd returned briefly to collect some of her belongings, planning to move them to the rooms Aurelius had given her in the royal wing. The paper was black with silver writing, the message short and chilling. Humans don't belong in vampire politics. Leave before you're removed. She brought it directly to Aurelius, who read it with mounting fury. His hands crumpled the paper, his eyes blazing crimson. Who has access to the servants' quarters? He demanded. Everyone, practically. The locks are basic. Nina touched his arm. It's just words. I'm fine. It's a threat against you. That is not fine. He called for Cassian immediately. I want guards on Nina at all times, discreet but present, and I want an investigation into who's behind this. Over the next few days, more notes appeared, in her rooms, in the library where she liked to read. Once, disturbingly, on Aurelius's throne itself, the messages grew bolder. The king's distraction will be dealt with. Human blood is for drinking, not courting. You'll regret not leaving while you could. Aurelius became increasingly protective, refusing to let Nina out of his sight. She understood his concern, but the constant surveillance was suffocating. I can't live like this, she said after the 5th note appeared. Constantly afraid, constantly guarded. You think I can? Aurelius paced his chambers like a caged predator. Someone is threatening you, Nina. Threatening what's mine. I should be able to protect you in my own castle. And I can't even identify the culprit. Maybe that's exactly what they want, to drive a wedge between us, to make us paranoid and isolated. Nina caught his hand, pulling him to a stop. We can't let them win. They won't win, Aurelius said darkly. Because I'm going to find whoever's responsible and make an example of them that the court will remember for centuries. The investigation led nowhere. Whoever was leaving the notes was clever about covering their tracks. No scent traces, no magical signatures, no witnesses. It was maddening. Then the attempts escalated from threats to action. Nina was walking through the castle gardens one evening, 2 guards trailing discreetly behind her, when she felt something whiz past her head. She turned just in time to see a crossbow bolt embedded in the tree beside her. If she hadn't bent to examine a flower at that exact moment, it would have pierced her heart. The guards immediately surrounded her, searching for the attacker. They found no one. Just the crossbow, abandoned in the bushes, completely unmarked. Aurelius nearly destroyed his throne room when he heard. Only Nina's presence kept him from rampaging through the castle, tearing apart anyone he suspected. This ends now, he snarled, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. You're not leaving my sight, not for a second, Aurelius. No arguments. Someone just tried to kill you. In my garden, under the protection of my guards. His voice shook with rage. I will burn this entire castle to the ground before I let them succeed. A meeting of the inner court was called. The highest-ranking vampires gathered in a private chamber while Nina waited outside with Cassian. She could hear raised voices. Aurelius is cutting through them all like a blade. One of you knows something. Someone in this court is responsible. I will find out who, and when I do, death will be a mercy compared to what I'll do to them. Hours passed. Nina sat in uncomfortable silence, trying not to imagine what would happen if the culprit was never found. Would she spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder? Would Aurelius lose himself to the paranoia and rage she'd seen building in him? Finally, the doors opened. Vampires filed out, most refusing to meet her eyes. Then Aurelius emerged with Lady Seraphine held firmly by the arm. The silver-haired vampire looked furious and terrified in equal measure. "Tell her," Aurelius commanded. "I don't know what you." His grip tightened. "Tell her." Lady Seraphine's amber eyes met Nina's with pure hatred. "I left the notes. I hired the human assassin. You're a distraction, a weakness. The king needs to focus on his duties, not on some mortal girl who'll be dead in a blink anyway." Nina felt cold. This elegant ancient vampire had tried to kill her. Not out of personal vendetta, but because she saw Nina as politically inconvenient. "You betrayed your king," Aurelius said softly, dangerously. "Attacked an innocent under his protection. Brought a human assassin into my home, risking exposure for all our kind. What do you think the punishment for that should be?" "My lord, I was trying to protect you by murdering someone I love?" His voice could have frozen fire. "By making me choose between justice and mercy? There is no mercy for this, Seraphine. You've lost that right." He turned to Cassian. "Take her to the dungeons. She'll face tribunal at tomorrow's court session." As the guards dragged Lady Seraphine away, still protesting, Aurelius pulled Nina into his arms. She felt him shaking. "I almost lost you," he whispered into her hair. "If you'd been standing straighter, if that bolt had been aimed 1 inch differently." "But it wasn't," Nina said firmly. "I'm here. I'm fine. This time." She pulled back to look at him. "Are you having second thoughts? About us?" "Never." The certainty in his voice was absolute. "But I'm terrified every second. You're so fragile, Nina, so breakable. And there are hundreds of vampires in this castle. Thousands in my kingdom. I can't protect you from all of them. So what do we do?" Aurelius was quiet for a long moment. Then carefully he said, "There is one option, one way to ensure you're truly safe, that you're strong enough to defend yourself." Understanding dawned. "You mean turning me? I would never force that choice on you. Ever. It's your decision to make." He cupped her face gently. "But if you wanted it, if you chose it freely, I would give you eternity power, safety. We'd have centuries together instead of decades." Nina's mind raced. Becoming a vampire, leaving behind humanity, sunlight, aging, gaining immortality, strength, time with Aurelius that wouldn't end with her death. "I need to think about it," she said honestly. "That's not a decision I can make right now. Take all the time you need, years if necessary. I just wanted you to know the option exists." He kissed her forehead. "Whatever you choose, I'll love you, human or vampire, now or forever." That night Nina lay awake long after Aurelius had fallen into his daytime rest. She stared at the ceiling, weighing impossible choices. Becoming a vampire would solve so many problems. She'd be safe from threats, powerful enough to stand beside Aurelius as an equal. They'd have limitless time together. She could learn everything he knew, see everything he'd seen. It was tempting beyond measure, but she'd also lose the sun. The warmth of it on her skin, the simple joy of a summer day. She'd lose the normal progression of a human life. Children, if she'd ever wanted them. Growing old with someone, experiencing that journey together. She'd lose herself, in a way. Nina the human would die, and someone new would take her place. Was love worth that sacrifice? Was any love worth that much? She looked at Aurelius sleeping beside her, peaceful in a way she rarely saw him while awake. She thought about how he'd carried her when she collapsed. How he'd forbidden her from working herself to death. How he'd opened his world to her, shared his art and his books and his carefully guarded heart. How he'd protected her, fought for her, loved her with an intensity that spanned centuries. Yes, she realized, this love was worth it. Whatever the cost, whatever the sacrifice, being with him was worth it. But that didn't mean she had to decide today. Lady Seraphine's tribunal was swift and merciless. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and she'd confessed directly to Aurelius and multiple witnesses. The court voted unanimously for exile, a punishment considered worse than death for vampires. She would be stripped of her position, her resources, and banned from all vampire territories. Effectively, she'd be made a wanderer, forever outcast. Aurelius pronounced the sentence himself, his voice carrying no satisfaction, just grim finality. "Let this serve as a reminder," he told the assembled court. "Threatening those under my protection is not politics. It's not strategy, it's treason. The next person who tries will not face tribunal. They'll face me." The message was clear. Nina was untouchable now, protected by both law and the vampire king's personal wrath. In the weeks that followed, castle life began to normalize. The new working conditions for servants were implemented, leading to improved morale and efficiency. Nina officially moved into the royal wing, her rooms connected to Aurelius's by a private door that was never locked. She began learning about vampire politics, sitting in on court sessions, offering perspectives that Aurelius admitted he'd never considered. "You see things I miss," he told her one evening. "Human things, emotional things. You make me a better king." She also began training in self-defense with Cassian. If she was going to be the king's consort, human or not, she needed to be able to protect herself. The vampire guard was patient and surprisingly encouraging. "You're fast," he said after she managed to land a hit on him. "Fast and clever. That's more valuable than strength sometimes." "Sometimes isn't always," Nina panted, accepting the water he offered. "I'm still human, Cassian. Still weak compared to any of you." "Weak isn't the word I'd use for someone who faced down the vampire king and won his heart. That takes courage none of us possess." She laughed, but his words stayed with her. She wasn't weak. She'd survived circumstances that would have broken others. She'd earned her place here, not through power but through strength of character. That mattered. Months passed in a rhythm of court politics, quiet evenings and deepening love. Nina learned vampire history, protocol, the intricate web of alliances that kept their world functioning in secret alongside humanity. She met visiting dignitaries from other courts, and while some remained skeptical of a human consort, most were simply curious. She won over more than a few with her quick wit and genuine interest in their stories. Aurelius continued painting, and his work began showing the soul he'd always claimed was missing. Nina appeared in dozens of canvases, sometimes recognizable, sometimes as abstract representations of light and warmth. His favorite was a portrait of her laughing, completely unguarded, that he hung in his private study where only he could see it. "You're my muse," he said simply when she asked why he kept it hidden. "Some beauty is too precious to share." They traveled together, visiting other vampire territories. Nina saw castles in Eastern Europe that made Thorne look modern, underground cities beneath Tokyo, an entire vampire society living in the Australian outback. The world was so much larger and stranger than she'd ever imagined. And through it all the question lingered. Human or vampire? Mortal or immortal? Aurelius never pressured her. He made sure she understood exactly what becoming a vampire would entail. The bloodthirst that would consume her for the first decade. The loss of sunlight. The way her human emotions would intensify and change. The way she'd view her old life like a distant dream. "It's not a gift," he said seriously. "It's a transformation. You'd be reborn as something different. I love who you are now, Nina. I don't want you to choose this because you think it's what I want." "What do you want?" she asked. "I want you to be happy. That's all I've ever wanted. If that means staying human and living a full mortal life, I'll cherish every second we have. If it means becoming a vampire and spending eternity beside me, I'll make sure you never regret it." He pulled her close. "The choice is yours alone." The decision crystallized one perfect autumn evening. They were in the garden, watching the sunset together. Nina had always loved sunsets, the way the sky transformed into fire and gold. Aurelius couldn't watch with her, not directly. The setting sun was still too much for his eyes. So he sat in the shadows while she stood in the dying light, and she felt the unfairness of it in her bones. "I want to watch sunsets with you," she said suddenly. "Not near you. With you. I want centuries to learn everything you know. I want to be strong enough to stand beside you as an equal, not as something fragile you have to constantly protect." She turned to face him. "I want forever, Aurelius, with you." As a vampire, he went completely still. "Are you certain?" "Nina, once it's done, I'm certain." She'd never been more certain of anything. "Turn me, make me yours in every way, give me eternity." Aurelius rose, moving to stand before her in the fading light. "It'll hurt. The transformation is agony. You'll feel yourself dying, feel the vampire venom remaking you from the inside out. It takes 3 days. 3 days of pain. I know. I'm still certain. You'll never be fully human again. Never age, never die naturally. You'll need blood to survive. You'll Aurelius." Nina took his hands. "I know all of this. You've made sure I understand exactly what I'm choosing. And I choose you. I choose us. I choose forever." His eyes blazed crimson, and she saw hope and fear and love all warring in them. When tonight? Why wait? Why waste another day of the limited time she had left as human? Right now, if you're willing. "I've never turned anyone," he admitted. "Never wanted to. The responsibility of creating a new vampire, of being their sire, it's immense. If something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong. You're the vampire king. You've lived 800 years. If anyone can do this safely, it's you." She stepped closer, tilting her head to expose her throat. "I trust you completely." Aurelius pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I love you. Whatever happens, remember that. I love you more than I thought possible. I love you too. Now make me immortal." He carried her to his chambers, laying her gently on the bed. The room had been prepared, she noticed. Heavy curtains drawn, medical supplies standing by, Isadora waiting in the shadows. Just in case, Aurelius explained, seeing her notice the physician. I'm not taking any chances with your life. He lay beside her on the bed, arranging her carefully. The process is simple. I'll drain most of your blood, then give you mine to replace it. The vampire venom in my blood will spread through your system and begin the transformation. You'll fall unconscious almost immediately. When you wake 3 days from now, you'll be a vampire. And if something goes wrong, then Isadora is here to intervene, but nothing will go wrong. His certainty comforted her. Are you ready? Nina took a deep breath, her last as a fully human woman. Yes. Aurelius bent to her throat, his fangs extending. I love you, he whispered against her skin. Then he bit down. This time was different from his normal feeding. He drank deeply, pulling her blood in long, steady draws. Nina felt herself weakening, felt the life draining from her body. Fear spiked briefly, the animal part of her brain screaming that she was dying. But she forced herself to relax, to trust. When she was on the edge of unconsciousness, Aurelius stopped. She heard him bite his own wrist, felt him press it to her lips. Drink, he commanded softly. Drink and be reborn. His blood tasted like copper and darkness and eternity. Nina swallowed once, twice, 3 times. Power flooded through her veins like liquid fire. Then the pain began. Every cell in her body felt like it was burning from the inside out. She tried to scream, but her voice wouldn't work. Her back arched off the bed as agony consumed her. Distantly, she felt Aurelius holding her, heard him speaking in a language she didn't recognize. Ancient words of comfort or maybe prayer. Then blackness swallowed her whole, and Nina the human slipped away into transformation. She woke 3 days later to a world transformed. Everything was sharper, clearer, more intense than it had been as a human. She could hear heartbeats in distant rooms, smell blood and fear and joy mixing in the air. Colors she'd never imagined existed now painted her vision. The texture of the sheets beneath her felt overwhelming in its complexity. And she was strong. She sat up effortlessly, feeling power coiled in her muscles like compressed steel. Her body felt perfect, every movement graceful and precise. Nina? She turned toward Aurelius's voice and saw him properly for the first time. As a vampire, he was breathtaking in a way her human eyes had never fully captured. She could see the age in him, the power, the centuries of existence written in every line of his being. He was magnificent. It worked, she whispered, and her voice sounded different. Clearer, somehow more resonant. I'm a vampire, you are. He moved to sit beside her carefully as though she might shatter. How do you feel? Everything is so much. The sounds, the smells. I can hear someone crying 5 floors down. I can smell, is that blood? Your senses are heightened. It'll take time to adjust, to learn to filter what you're perceiving. He touched her face gently. Look at me. Really look. She met his eyes and gasped. She could see the bond between them now, visible as threads of silver light connecting their souls. What is that? The sire bond. I'm your creator, your maker. We'll always be connected now. You'll always be able to feel me, find me, know when I'm in danger or distressed. He smiled softly. As I'll know for you. Nina reached up to touch her mouth, feeling the sharp points of her new fangs. Will I need to feed soon? Within the next day or so. The bloodlust will build slowly at first, then become overwhelming. We'll make sure you're prepared. He helped her stand, steadying her when her new strength made her movements too quick. Easy. You're much stronger now. It'll take practice to control it. She took a careful step, then another. Her body moved like a dancer's, perfectly balanced and graceful. This is incredible. Wait until you try moving fast. Aurelius gestured toward the balcony. Want to see what you can really do? The next hour was a revelation. Aurelius taught her to move at vampire speed, blurring from place to place faster than human eyes could follow. He showed her how to climb walls, how to sense prey, how to mask her presence from mortals. Nina absorbed it all like a sponge, her new vampire instincts rising to meet each challenge. When she finally needed to rest, they returned to his chambers. She could see dawn approaching, feel her body responding to it with drowsiness. The daylight sleep, Aurelius explained. We'll rest soon, but first, I want to give you something. He retrieved a small box from his desk, opening it to reveal a ring. The band was white gold, set with a ruby that matched their eyes. Nina Orwell, born human and reborn vampire, would you do me the honor of becoming my queen? Not just my consort, but my partner in ruling, my equal in all things. He knelt before her, a vampire king on his knees. Will you marry me? Tears of blood welled in Nina's eyes. The only kind vampires could cry. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her. This kiss was different from all the ones before. 2 immortals meeting as equals, 2 vampires bound by love and blood and eternity. Nina felt power crackling between them, felt the depth of connection that only shared immortality could forge. "My queen," Aurelius murmured against her lips. "My king," she answered, and felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. They were married 3 months later in a ceremony that brought together vampire courts from across the globe. Nina wore a dress of white silk that complemented her new pale skin. Her brown hair left long and loose. Aurelius wore formal black with silver accents, his white hair gleaming in the candlelight. They spoke their vows in the ancient vampire tongue, pledging eternity to each other before hundreds of witnesses. The celebration lasted 3 days, as was traditional for vampire royal weddings. Nina met more vampires than she could count, heard stories spanning millennia, danced until even her supernatural stamina was tested. Through it all, Aurelius never left her side, his hand finding hers constantly, his eyes tracking her with possessive adoration. On the final night, as they retreated to their private chambers, Nina stood on the balcony looking out at the grounds. She'd lost the sun, true, but she'd gained stars she could actually see clearly, darkness that was no longer frightening, and an eternity with the being she loved most. "Any regrets?" Aurelius asked, joining her at the railing. "Not one." She leaned against him, feeling his arm wrap around her waist. "This is everything I wanted. You're everything I wanted. You saved me," he said quietly. "I'd become so isolated, so disconnected from feeling anything. Then you collapsed on those stairs and everything changed. You made me remember what it meant to care, to love, to be human, even though I'm not." "We saved each other," Nina corrected. "I was working myself to death, thinking I had to earn my right to exist. You showed me I mattered, that I was worth protecting, worth caring about." She turned in his arms, her vampire grace making the movement fluid. "Now we get forever to keep saving each other." "Forever sounds perfect," Aurelius agreed, kissing her as dawn approached. They retreated inside as the sun began to rise, curling together in their bed in the darkness. Nina's last thought before daylight sleep claimed her was simple and true. She was home. After years of feeling invisible, after a lifetime of struggling to find where she belonged, she'd finally found her place. In the arms of a vampire king who'd waited 800 years for her. In a life that would span centuries instead of decades. In a love that would never age, never fade, never end. She'd collapsed on the stairs as a dying human maid. She'd been carried to bed by a vampire king who'd forbidden her from working. And now she was immortal, powerful, queen of the northern courts, and deeply, completely, eternally in love. The story could have ended there, with the perfect wedding, the transformation complete, the couple united in immortality. But life, even vampire life, continued beyond the fairy tale moments. Nina proved to be a natural leader. Her years as a servant gave her insights into how the castle truly functioned, what needed changing, where improvements could be made. She revolutionized the treatment of human staff, not just at Castle Thorne, but across all vampire territories that followed their example. Under her influence, working conditions improved, pay increased, and respect became the standard rather than the exception. She also became a bridge between vampire and human worlds in ways Aurelius never could have managed alone. Nina remembered being human. She understood their fears, their needs, their perspective. When disputes arose between vampires and their human employees or neighbors, she mediated with wisdom that came from having lived on both sides. The court came to love her, even those who'd initially resented a former human servant becoming their queen. She was fair but firm, kind but not weak, accessible but still commanding of respect. More than one vampire admitted that the king had chosen far better than they'd believed possible. Aurelius watched her flourish with pride that bordered on worship. She'd become everything he'd known she would, everything he'd seen potential for during those 2 weeks of recovery. His equal in ruling, his partner in eternity, his constant reminder of why immortality was worth living. They developed new traditions together. Weekly time set aside for art, where they'd paint side by side, and Nina would continue teaching him about vulnerability and imperfection. Monthly visits to human cities, walking among mortals to remember where Nina had come from. Yearly trips to see the world, both vampire territories and human wonders, never staying still long enough to become isolated again. Nina never forgot her origins. She established a fund for struggling servants, ensured that anyone working in vampire households had access to education and opportunities for advancement. Some of the most trusted positions in the Northern Court were held by humans who'd proven themselves capable, with Nina's support lifting them to roles previously unthinkable. "You're changing our entire society," Aurelius told her one evening, watching her review applications for a new scholarship program she'd created. "I'm making it better," Nina corrected. "More fair. Humans aren't just food sources or servants. They're people with value beyond what they can provide us. The more vampires understand that, the safer we all become, pragmatic as well as compassionate. I definitely married well. She looked up at him with a smile that still made his ancient heart stutter. You married for love. The competence was just a bonus. Quite a bonus, he agreed, pulling her away from the paperwork to kiss her properly. Decades passed, then a century. Nina adapted to immortality with remarkable grace, learning to balance her vampire nature with the humanity she refused to fully abandon. She never killed when feeding, never took more than freely offered, never used her power to harm those weaker than herself. She became known throughout vampire society as the compassionate queen, a title she wore with pride. Threats still came occasionally, a radical vampire faction who wanted to return to the old ways of human subjugation, a group of human hunters who discovered the existence of vampires and wanted them exterminated, political rivals who saw an opportunity in attacking the queen to weaken the king. Each time, Nina proved she was no delicate flower in need of constant protection. She was a vampire queen with centuries of experience, lethal when necessary, strategic always, and absolutely not to be underestimated. Aurelius found himself falling in love with her again and again. Every decade revealed new depths to her, new strengths, new aspects of her personality that delighted him. She was constantly growing, constantly learning, constantly becoming more herself. Immortality hadn't frozen her in place. It had given her infinite time to evolve. Do you ever miss it? He asked one evening as they stood on a mountain peak watching distant city lights. Being human? The simplicity of a finite life? Nina considered the question seriously. Sometimes I miss the sun on my face, the taste of human food, the way time felt urgent instead of endless. She leaned against him. But I don't regret the trade. This life with you, learning and growing and experiencing things humans never could? It's extraordinary. I'd choose it again. Even knowing everything you know now? The difficulties, the dangers, the way other vampires will always remember you were human once? Especially knowing what I know now. She turned to face him, her crimson eyes meeting his. Because I know that the vampire who carried me to bed when I collapsed didn't just save my life. He gave me a reason to want to keep living, and then he gave me forever to enjoy it. Aurelius pulled her close, holding her as the night deepened around them. I love you, Nina Orwell. I love you too, Aurelius Drăculești, for now and always. They stood together on that mountain peak, two immortal beings who'd found each other against all odds. A vampire king who'd lived 800 years alone before learning how to love. A human maid who'd almost worked herself to death before discovering her own worth. They'd been broken separately and become whole together. The castle far below them continued its ancient rhythms. Vampires rising for the evening, servants preparing for the night's work, politics and power and all the complications of immortal society playing out in endless cycles. But here, above it all, there was only peace. Nina had climbed a staircase 3 years ago, carrying a tea tray and exhaustion heavier than any burden should be. She'd fallen, expecting the hard impact of failure and shame, and the end of everything she'd worked for. Instead, she'd been caught by hands that would never let her fall again. Carried to safety by someone who saw her value when she'd forgotten it herself. Forbidden from destroying herself, then given something worth living for. Now she stood on top of the world with eternity stretching before her, and the love of her life beside her, and knew that every step of that journey had been worth it. The pain, the transformation, the challenges of learning to be something new while honoring what she'd been. All of it had led here, to this moment, to this love, to this perfect sense of belonging. She was Nina Orwell, former servant and current queen. She was a vampire who remembered being human. She was the partner to a king who'd waited centuries for her. She was exactly who she was meant to be, and she was home. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient dance. The night embraced them in comfortable darkness, and two immortal hearts beat in perfect synchronization, bound by love and blood and the unbreakable promise of forever. This was where the fairy tale became reality, where the story didn't end but simply continued, page after page, year after year, century after century. Where love proved stronger than death, where companionship defeated loneliness, where two souls found their perfect complement in each other, Aurelius and Nina, vampire king and vampire queen, together for all eternity. The end was only the beginning.